Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another live stream. My name is Brandon Hicks. It is Friday, and I'm extremely happy to be here with you guys hanging out. So, for the next couple of hours, we're going to be talking about an awesome topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is sketching. And it's my firm belief that if you're going to be any kind of artist, even a 3D artist, that it's really important to learn basic sketching techniques so that you can expand on your abilities and communicate your ideas more effectively for yourself and for other people on a team or on the web. So tonight we're going to be taking a look at how to get started with sketching in Photoshop. It's a little bit different than the normal streams I've been doing. I've been mostly doing Blender related stuff because that's typically what I teach. But on Fridays, I am experimenting a little bit with doing some more off-topic stuff. So if you guys like it, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about tonight's stream and how you think it could maybe be better, and then some topics that you would like to see in the future for off-topics streams. Okay, so let's jump in, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. Okay, so here we can see that I've got Photoshop running right now. If you want to go ahead and follow along, you can. So I'm not going to talk about installing Photoshop or anything like that as far as the stream goes tonight. If you guys have anything specific you want me to get into in terms of my tablet settings or things about any of the Photoshop preferences or things as I go, just ask. I'm going to talk a little bit more about techniques that you can apply to Photoshop or any other software in terms of digital sketching or painting. And these are also techniques that you can take with you and use in a sketchbook that's a physical sketchbook. And so I like to actually sketch quite a bit more in an actual notebook because I think the feel of the pen is a little bit easier than using a tablet. But that's just personal preference. So whatever you guys want to do is fine. Tonight, let's start off a little bit with how I go about creating brushes, because that is going to give you guys a little bit better setup for getting into doing your own things here. So Photoshop comes bundled with quite a bit of brushes that are built in. So if you want to just use the ones that are here, you can feel free to do that. Just go into your brush palette right here, and then you can load up the default brushes that you want to use. And so you need to be in here. And then let's go to the preset manager, and you can see all of the different types of brushes that I have loaded up right here. So I've got some custom ones that are there, but then I'm also using some of the default ones as well. And so all of those are kind of saved as presets. And then over here in the brushes palettes, you can change the settings for individual brushes. And so if you want to kind of change which brushes you have visible, you can reset all the brushes here and go about it that way. I'm using a custom plugin called Brushbox. So I've been using that lately and it's been kind of good. So if you go to extensions, you can see it there. And then it just helps me organize my brushes a lot better in a list. So I've been sticking with that. But if you want to use the default Photoshop brushes, then that's fine as well. And so let's talk about how we would go about creating some new ones. So restore default brushes will basically take you back to all of the original Photoshop brushes. But in this case, what I want to do is create a new document here. I need to pick a size that is going to be the size of my brush's default setting. And so I'm going to start off with something that's, let's just say 256 by 256. And then I'm going to fill the background with a white color. And all we need to do to create a brush is create any sort of black shape on top of this. So we can go back to a brush. We can start with an original brush that was provided for us by Photoshop. And so we can grab one of those. In my case, what I'm going to do instead of painting one is I'm going to draw with the marquee selection. And so let's do a lasso here. And all you really need to do is create some sort of shape that you want to try out, and then just fill that with black. So anything can be a brush, it can be an image, it can be grayscale, color, whatever you want it to be. But in this case, we just want to center it up on the tool, or on the canvas here. And then I always like to kind of play a little bit with the edges. So we might consider like blurring it a little bit. Just a little bit, not much. You don't have to do a Gaussian blur or anything like that, but you can feel free to kind of sculpt into this. So if we switch over to the eraser tool and then pick a like softer brush here, we can play with kind of erasing some of these edges and creating a better shape like this. And what I want to do is just give myself kind of a basic sketching brush to use tonight. And so whatever we end up with is kind of what I'm going to end up using. So I'm just using some of the default brushes that come with Photoshop. And what I might do is paint a little bit of some speckles into this and treat this kind of like a paintbrush. But what this will do is give you kind of a broken sort of pencil type of effect that's a little bit less crystal clear, and it'll look a little less digital. So we might try that. And then what you need to do once you're done creating your brush is you need to create a brush preset with it. So we can select everything here with the marquee tool. If you go to edit, you can go down to define brush preset. And then all you have to do is name the preset to save it into Photoshop. So I'm going to call this rough sketch, and you can see it already selected the brush in my paintbrush here. It's already been selected. You'll see it also pop up in the little add-on that I have. Now it's called rough sketch, so I'll drag that into my other brushes that I've created and clean up my menus a little bit here. And it's going to default to saving it at whatever size you created this at. So it's saving it at a 177, but then you can go into your settings over here and kind of dial this back down to whatever you want to use it with. So if we want to test this out, we can jump back over to my other open document here, and I've been saving sort of a digital sketchbook. So I'm going to switch to a black color, and we're going to start dialing in some of these paintbrush settings, because all we've done so far is define the shape of the tip of our brush, and so we need to define some of the settings and how it's being used. So if I just start drawing with it right now, it's kind of boring. There's not a lot of interactivity with the tablet going on, and it's just really thick black strokes. So I'm going to get rid of all of that stuff, and let's jump into the brush settings and define some of the settings for the rough sketch brush. So the first thing that you're going to see in a brush tip shape is the size. Again, you can dial this in to be whatever you want. If you want to do a sketching brush, you probably want to go a little smaller, maybe around 4 pixels. And you can control the spacing, which is how far apart the stroke is applied to the canvas. So if you space it out really, really far like this, you're going to get dots as you paint. And then the closer you get together, the more continuous the line is going to be as you paint. If you get really, really low spacing on some bigger, heavier brushes, it can slow down a little bit when you're trying to paint. But on a simple brush like this, it shouldn't be a problem. So I'm going to leave it around there. And then we need to jump into some of these other settings and play a little bit with these. So the first thing I like to do is go to Shape Dynamics. And under the size, I want to change the control to be my pen pressure on my tablet. That's going to let me taper in lines thick to thin. So if I get rid of everything and make the brush a little bigger here, you can see as I lightly press, it's going to be sort of thin. And then as I heavy press on my tablet, it's going to stroke in a really, really strong stroke like that. And so you can dial in a minimum diameter, and you can always jitter the size here, which will give you a little bit more of a rough edge, as you can see in the preview here. So now when I sketch, it's going to look a little bit more like paint. So I might take that down a little bit. And let's see, I don't want a minimum diameter, but I do want to make this smaller again. And angle jitter will change the angle of the stroke. So because ours is sort of angled to the upper left-hand corner, and we look under the brush tip shape, if we rotate it, you can see how it changes in the preview. The jitter will allow you to randomly jitter that on every single stroke. And so again, it just gives you kind of a rougher edge there. If you take that back down, you're gonna get more of a smooth stroke like that. And then same thing for the roundness. So all of these settings combined can give you quite a unique looking stroke depending on what you're trying to create here. So I'm gonna leave that down. We're not doing anything special effect wise with this brush, so I'm just gonna leave all these settings alone except for pin pressure. And the next thing I always usually check off is under transfer. So if we go to transfer, this is gonna control how much the pen is putting ink onto the page. And so with opacity set to pin pressure as well, that's going to let you create a much more soft edge as you are lightly pressing on the tablet. So you can see, even though we have a black color selected here, as I lightly press, I'm getting less and less ink putting on the page. And the more I press, the more it's gonna add. And that's in conjunction with the tip being smaller, the less I press. And so this is sort of the basic settings you need to have in place to get a realistic looking brush setting into effect. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna shrink this back down. So it is approximately the size of a pin or something like that. And now you can see we've got kind of an interesting little sketching brush that'll give us some dynamic looking angles here. So I would highly recommend getting in here and playing a whole lot with brushes. So we just created this one. It was really simple. There's a whole lot of other settings you can play with in here. And then once you dial that in, you can save that as the preset and it will remember all of those settings. And so as we switch back, you'll see that all of the settings that we just created are not there anymore. And that's because it had the originals locked in. And so if we want to set this back up, then we can quickly dial that in just like that, get our size in the approximate size we need it to be in for the sketching brush. And then we can jump into the brush palette over here. And then we've got this create a new preset from this brush. So we can select that. It's gonna ask you whether you wanna capture the size that you currently have this set at, and I do, so I'm gonna check that off. And then it's gonna ask me, do I wanna include all the settings that we changed? And I can say yes, and then you can even attach a specific color to a brush that's permanent if you'd like to do that. And so now I can save over the other one, and it's gonna add another one in here. I'm gonna take my original here that has all of this stuff not applied, delete that, and then take my new one and leave that where it is. And so now we have a permanent sketching brush in place, and we can use that tonight for our sketching session. So you'll see some other ones that I've created. I've got a big soft one that I added in here to give me some effects there. I have one that creates a stack of outlines of plates that I was using for an ebook that I was writing. So you can see with spacing this out further, I can stack a bunch of plates on top of each other, which is kind of fun. And so that was the plate sketch. This is actually the plate stacker, which again, you have to play with the spacing based on how big your brush size is over here. But you can kind of see how that is fun because it gives you a little bit of a wobbly stack of plates. And like I said before, you can also play with some of these other settings. So like angle jitter can come in here. We set it to a really low setting and it will make the plates kind of randomly appear wobbly as you're sketching. And so it might turn that up a little bit. And now you can get a really wobbly set of plates. So yeah, a lot of interesting, cool things you can do to save yourself some time as you get in here and create some custom brushes. So let's get back to sketching. Okay, so brushes are a little bit more advanced, but I wanted to kind of prepare you guys and show you a way to create your own because it's so much fun to get in here and play with that setting in Photoshop that I wanted you guys to be able to do that at the very beginning because that's a huge part of what makes this really, really interesting. But tonight we're going to be talking about sketching from a 3D artist perspective. And so what are some things that we can use sketching for that that would be applicable to the stuff we do in 3D? And so there's quite a bit of things that we can do. And if you think of any, feel free to like drop them in the comments, and would happily discuss what we can use this for. But so, and from where I'm sitting, like I use it for concept art. Sketching is really helpful for that. Concept art leads me to final designs. And once I have those, I jump into 3D. We've got a whole lot of different kinds of concept art. You've got characters. You've got environments. Depending on what kind of project you're working on, you may have, vehicle designs, product designs, maybe props, weapons, if I can write. So yeah, it just depends on what kind of project you're working on. But typically everything that I do in a project, no matter what project it is, will start with some sort of concept art, because for us, this is what most other people would refer to as brainstorming. And when people make lists and things like that, when they brainstorm, it's helpful, and you might start here with a list, but that's not going to be enough to get you all the way through to the end of the process. And so the problem here is that without a roadmap, which is what all of this does for us, getting to the step where we do 3D is going to be very, very shaky. Things can easily derail and not pan out the way that you're hoping, and then you're going to end up with all of the time wasted over here. I was talking about this with somebody today, and it's like, let's compare how long it takes me to do something in 2D versus 3D. And this may sound a little crazy, because if you're not used to 2D, you maybe don't realize this, but if I'm doing, let's say, a sketch, and whether it's a 2D sketch or a 3D sketch, let's say I'm doing a robot, right? So we've got a robot here, and we've got a robot here, and I want to make it look, let's say here I'm looking for a clay model. So I don't have to texture it. I just want to get it done where the model's looking good, it's sculpted, it's finished, and then I can say I did a clay render with a wireframe or something, and I'm done. That's just the modeling stuff. Robot over here, all I want to do is do the line art. Okay, no shading, no extra stuff, just let's draw it up in what would appear in a coloring book, basically. So I can probably do this, depending on the kind of robot that it is. Maybe I do this in 8 hours, and that's 8 hours max, right? That's probably split up over several days, but if I sat down an entire day I could devote to just doing the robot, I could probably get it done in 8 hours. The 3D robot, who knows? I mean, I've spent 100 hours before on objects that were as complicated as this possibly could be. And so the difference in time spent here versus here is really, really staggering. And so the more you can knock out all of your problems on this side before you get over to here, the more chances you're going to have to only work on the projects that are really going to be valuable to you, that are really going to be worth your time. And you're going to be able to start to see and learn by looking at these designs at the 2D stage before you get into 3D, what's going to work and what's not going to work. And that's really the goal here with concept art, is to figure out what is worth pursuing and what isn't worth pursuing. So I'm looking over in the chat, Lorian saying we could do creatures, and that is a good idea as well for concept art. So Yeah, creatures are something I would definitely recommend getting into and planning out before you jump in. So tonight, let's talk about. We've talked a little bit about why we do it. Let's talk about how we would go about doing it. I'm going to assume you don't have a lot of extensive experience sketching, either in Photoshop or maybe even on paper. Maybe you're just a 3D artist and you've always thought, well, let's try it, let's get into it, and then you really weren't able to figure it out or whatever. So tonight I'm going to walk through quite a few things, and we're going to talk about some basics, and then I'm going to give you some ideas for how you can take your sketching to the next level as a 3D artist. So one of the easiest things to do when you're first starting off learning how to sketch is, one, to kind of trace things that are already there to help you figure out how to look at things. And that sounds a little counterintuitive if you've heard other people talk about art before, but I would highly recommend using the 3D side of the process to your advantage. And so I'm going to jump into Blender and kind of show you what I'm saying. Because you already have all this experience learning how to use 3D software like Blender, you've got a distinct advantage over other people that are learning how to sketch. So let's take some of our basic primitives over here and let's drop them into our scene. So we've got a cube over here, and let's say we want to go into edit mode and let's kind of make some custom modifications to this cube here. And what I'm trying to do is give myself a guide for what I'm going to be sketching in Photoshop. And so the idea is not to spend a lot of time in Blender doing this up, but I just want to get the big boxy shapes in place for something, okay? And so we might, do a little bit of extruding just to give ourselves something to kind of look at. And in this case, I'm not trying to model anything in particular. I'm just trying to give myself an interesting shape to play with. Okay, so if you're thinking about sketching something on a two-dimensional surface and you don't know a lot about perspective, then this is what usually starts tripping people up right here, is finding yourself getting to a point where you try to do something on paper that you've seen done in 3D, and then it all starts falling apart because you can't really picture it and get it onto the page. And so let's talk about how we can use this object to guide us in Photoshop. So what we can do basically is, I don't want to have to render anything. I want to make this as easy as possible. So all I'm going to do is I can take a little app that I have here and cut out a portion of the screen, and I'm basically just creating a screenshot. So I can do like a rectangular cut here, and that's going to let me cut this out. Then I can just copy this and paste this into Photoshop over here. If you want to do it straight out of Blender, all you have to do is use this little render button down at the very bottom of your 3D viewport, and this is for an OpenGL render. So it's going to take the angle that you're looking through the camera at, and it's going to save that out. And then you can just save this somewhere on your hard drive and copy that back into Photoshop. But what's cool about this is that we can also turn on the wireframe and then keep everything in our viewport here. And so let's turn off all of the grids and everything. So let's go to display, disable the grid floor and the X and Y. Let's put our 3D cursor way out there somewhere. And then I want to kind of find a good angle that I want to draw this from. I'm going to play a little bit with my lens. So let's set this to 50 millimeters instead of 35. And then let's say I want to do like a low angle. So this could be like a dinosaur foot, like a robot leg, or who knows what it is. But you can see from the shaded view what this looks like. And I'm going to leave wireframe on. And then I'm going to either press this, which will save this out for me, or if I open up my little snip tool here, and I think I downloaded this from the web, or maybe on the Windows 10 store somewhere. I think it was free, but basically just look up snipping tool, Windows 10, and it might be bundled, but I'm not really sure. Anyways, this is really handy because you can select different ways to cut out things on your screen. So I just hit new, and then I decide where I want to draw a box. and then it'll automatically open that up into a window, and I can right click and copy that. And then again, just paste this into Photoshop. So let's get rid of the other layer. I'm going to use this, and then we can scale this up a lot bigger so you guys can see kind of what this looks like. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to use this as a guide to help me figure out how to draw this on paper. So there's a lot of things you can do to make this easier to see as you go. If you want, you can just lower the opacity, and this will make it less and less or more transparent so that you can kind of use it like tracing paper. And the other thing you can do if you want is you can play with the blending modes here. So if you set this to screen, you can see that kind of ghosted in. You can also set this to multiply, and that will kind of do the opposite effect here. Sometimes what I like to do is invert if it's a darker image so it's brighter. And then I use something like multiply or screen. And you have to play a little bit with these and find which one works for you. But in our case, let's just use something like normal here, and we'll see what this looks like. So I'm going to lower the opacity just a little bit, and then I'm going to create a new layer on top of this. And so what I want to do is I want to try to figure out how this is working with perspective. And so what we're going to do is we're only going to draw the stuff that should be visible. So anything that's behind in the back, we don't want to draw. And this is a good exercise for you to just kind of get in here with your mind and see what you need to be focusing on in terms of seeing in 3D. When I say seeing in 3D, I mean on a two-dimensional surface while you're drawing. You need to be able to see in 3D. So if we look back and try not to cheat, because you don't want to cheat too much, but if you turn off the wireframe with Z and you turn back on your solid shading mode right here, you can see all the edges that should be visible from this point of view, from your camera angle. And so all the edges behind here, we don't want to draw right now. That's the exercise that we're doing. And so without looking, what I want to do is I want to jump back into Photoshop, and I want to pick out just the lines that are supposed to be in front. And some of you will find this super easy to do in the beginning. And you just want to draw a line here. And if you really want to quickly draw straight lines, what you can do is turn off your dynamics and your transfer here. And that will let you just draw lines that don't have any sort of thickness taper or opacity taper there. And then if you just hold Shift, you can draw straight lines or vertical lines. But you can also, with Shift, you can start a point somewhere. And then if you just hold Shift and then click again with your pen or your mouse, it will draw a straight line between those 2 points. And so we can use this really quickly to kind of block in what should be in front. And so I know that this is the front corner right here. This wireframe is going underneath, so that's on the ground. All of these back here are on the floor, so I don't want to paint these in, but this front part of the silhouette is obviously there. And then this right here is the first full face that we have, so we've got that there. Here's the front section. That's going to be another face. Another section. It's going to be another face. Now everything behind these we know is going to be hidden because these are already in the way. So you're not going to be able to see any of these lines back here. So we need to kind of go down the side. We know that's going to be visible. We know that's going to be visible. And then anything on the edge of the silhouette, you can pretty much guarantee it needs to be painted in. And then we have 2 faces. We have one there and one there. We've got connection up to there, up to there. This is a little confusing if you are not paying attention, but you should be able to tell from the way this is constructed what should be in front and what shouldn't be. And so this is going to be drawn straight down. That's a face. Here to here to here is another face. This is pointed up towards the sky, so you're not going to see that face. And then we've got the rest of our silhouette in here. So this is just one big face right here. So everything else we leave blank. And then if we turn off our layer underneath, you can see how well you did in matching that up with the original layer that you have in Blender. And so if I bring Blender up side by side, we can kind of see how well we did here. So turn off all the menus. And there we go. We've got everything in place the way it should be. And there's a lot of other things you can do from here to kind of take it to the next level. And so tonight we're just going to talk about drawing, but you could also start to focus on shading as well. So if you're more interested in figuring out how to render up your own concept art without having to build it out in 3D, you should study how to paint with shading and lighting. And this will give you a basic guide to go off of. And you need to pick a light source and then obviously start shading from there. So that's one exercise that you can do to kind of start teaching yourself a little bit about perspective before you need to learn all the perspective rules. But there's quite a bit to talk about with perspective. So I'll do a basic overview, and then I'm probably going to have to set aside a whole week of streams to talk about all the perspective rules. But we can get a little bit into that tonight. So give me 1 second. I'm going to do something. I'll be right back. Okay, so let's get back into what we're gonna do for the rest of some of the things tonight is sketching. And so one of the things besides doing this with 3D is obviously practicing your sketching techniques. And so to do that, I would recommend jumping in here with your sketching brush, and you want to practice drawing with lines. And so there's not a lot of tools that I switch around and I use in Photoshop when I'm drawing. But there are a couple I want to mention that are kind of important. And so let's kind of get into those a little bit here. So make sure we got our sketching tool up. One of the things I use quite a bit, and I've mapped this to my tablet on one of the buttons, is this little tool over here that allows you to move around the page. So it's called the hand tool, and it's in this menu down here. If you left click and drag with this active, it will allow you to kind of move your canvas around, which can be handy for when you're drawing. There's also the rotate view tool, which is under the same menu. So if you just left click and hold, this will pop up, and then you can select which tool you want and let go of your mouse button, and that will pop up. And this one's really handy because it allows you to rotate the canvas to any angle that you need to be in. And I've mapped both of these as shortcut keys on my tablet, so I can move with one stroke on the tablet, another stroke on the tablet, and then if I have those wired correctly to my tablet, it should always default to switching back to my brush automatically. So that means I can kind of maneuver the canvas into a good position, and then it should allow me to continuously get back into sketching whenever I'm ready to go. And if I miss it somehow, I can just go back and click the brush tool or hit B on my keyboard for brush, and that will kind of switch back in there for me. Usually if you let go of the rotate before you let go of the hotkey for the rotate tool, it should automatically switch you back to the brush tool, but sometimes that doesn't work. But that's really the only three hotkeys that I use on a regular basis while I'm sketching like this. And that's kind of the workflow that I use. So let's talk about what I would do also as I'm getting in here and learning how to sketch a little bit more. So you've got technique to worry about as far as drawing straight lines. It's a little easier in the computer because we talked about holding shift to allow you to draw straight lines across your screen. And that'll work horizontally or vertically using the same command. So drawing parallel lines that are vertical or horizontal is not that hard. Doing it on a diagonal is going to be a little bit more challenging, Here I'm still holding shift, but I'm using that method where we click in one location, shift and click in the other location. And you can see the problem. If I have my my shape dynamics and my transfer turned on where it's tapering the end of my strokes, it's based on how hard I click with my tablets and my pen. So you get some lines that are consistent, and then you get some lines that are kind of tapered off and not connected. And so this isn't a surefire way to always kind of make this work. And so what I would highly recommend is for big lines that are going all the way across the canvas, use the cheats. And then for lines that are closer in, you want to be able to manually sketch in parallel straight lines. And that's going to be hard to nail consistently. It's going to take a lot of practice. It's a little easier to do on paper because you're not going to be less connected to the pen itself. And so with it being digital and there not being a lot of feedback on the tablet, with vibrations and things from the tip, it's going to be a little hard to feel when you're actually hitting those strokes consistently. But with practice in Photoshop, you should be able to get to a point where you can do this consistently. And I'm much better on paper, but it is possible to do it in Photoshop. And so you'll start small, trying to create consistently straight lines, and you want to try to do them pretty close together. And then you get to a point where you can do medium-sized lines like this. And then you want to get to a point where you can do really long lines that are consistently straight. And this will take quite a bit of practice. But one of the secrets is that you want to pivot from your elbow. So if you've got the pen right here and your elbow is back here, you want to pivot from this point of view and not from your wrist, because your wrist will kind of make you do arcs, and you don't want to do that. You want to keep your wrist straight, and then you want to just pivot from your elbow here and use your shoulder to kind of do the big movements. And so that's really the only trick there is to being able to do these really, really long lines, is learn how to get a consistent pressure on the tablet and then rotate from your elbow or your shoulder. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about how I would practice sketching on a regular basis. And I do this every night of the week. So this is something that's really, really handy. And one of the things that you really need to do when you get into this is find something that you're passionate about and kind of gets you going. And so one of the things I would recommend doing is pulling up some reference. And so in our case, we'll go over to Pinterest and let's find something we want to work on here. So you've seen me look at a lot of things for the Atlantean Amulet project that I've been working on, but let's get a topic. Whoever's in the chat, throw me out a topic that you want me to sketch tonight, and let's talk about that. And that's what I'll search. Just let me know. Because I want to do something that you guys find a little bit interesting. So yeah, let me know and we can check that out. And I'll be happy to work on anything that you guys want me to. If you don't have any ideas, that's cool. I'll pick something to do. But it really depends on, what you're trying to work on. And so it can be organics, anything. Lorian's saying she wants me to draw cats. So you want me to do like just cats. So let's just search cats. Okay. How about this one? You guys like this one? Is that a good one? I don't know. This one's kind of fun. Let's try this one. So what's interesting about this is that you've got the cat itself, which is going to be difficult enough to draw, but then you've got an interesting pose going on. And so depending on what you're trying to study, whether it's animation or anything like that, anything that you can learn that a 2D animator would use, you can also apply that to 3D animation, because you have to learn how to pose things. And so let's grab this right here, copy the image, jump into Photoshop, and then we're just going to paste this right here in the middle. Okay, so same process. Let's lower the opacity a little bit. And if you're just starting off, what I would do is I would create a new layer, and just try to get the most important information drawn into the image. So the first mistake a lot of people make is they try to draw every single little line that they see in the image. They try to draw every single hair and whisker and all that stuff. You don't want to do that. Basically what you want to do is you just want to capture enough detail that somebody can look at it and they can go, oh, that's a cat, okay? And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to look for areas that have a lot of contrast that have to be there for us to read what this is. And then we're just going to focus on simplifying what we see. So let's zoom in a little bit here. And I'm going to lower my size here. And to do this, I'm just using the bracket keys on my keyboard. So the left and right bracket will automatically shrink or expand the size of your pen as you're drawing. And typically I would tell you to start off out here, but because this is going to be a little harder for you guys to see, I'm going to zoom in this case so you guys can see what I'm doing. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for areas like right around the outside of the eyes that have a lot of contrast between the part here that's black and the part here that's white. And I know that because that's an edge, that's what I need to draw in, because that's what we're doing here. We're defining form, and form happens whenever you've got anything that changes direction on a three-dimensional surface, okay? So anywhere there's an edge that's a main edge, we want to draw that in. So let's start by just kind of blocking in where the eye is. And I'm just tracing this. I'm not even try to, do anything fancy here. I'm just tracing what we have here. The highlight is a big area of contrast. Let's draw that in. Got a little bit of the eye that we need to have here. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. So let's draw in this section over here. And this is just going to train your eye to look for areas that have enough contrast that they have to be included for you to see clearly what this is when you turn that bottom layer off. So the nose is going to be important because, again, there's a big shift in the way that this happens. And it's also iconical. Humans will be able to tell from these little shapes here that this is sort of a cat from the way this nose looks. So I want to draw where that dips down and back into where the mouth is. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw one continuous line all the way around here. Now, if your lines are a little wobbly and you're having trouble getting those straight, what you can do is take the smoothing setting and turn this up here. So if we turn it up to something like 50, it's going to delay your stroke a little bit. So it's behind my mouse and you can see how smooth it makes those lines. And so that will help you a little bit if you're painting digitally or sketching digitally to get those lines more straight as you're blocking these in. So I just want to kind of get that in there. Got a little bit of contrast happening right around there. Do know that we have a big part of the mouth that drops down into there. Zoom out a little bit. So we've got a big silhouette for the ears. So we're going to draw this up over here. Drop this down. Notice how I'm ignoring all the hair right there because we don't really need it to tell that this is a cat. So add a little bit of a flare there just for some style. These are going to help define what's happening as that nose is sort of coming out and protruding a little bit. And as you get closer to being finished with defining the main shapes, you're going to start to be able to zoom out and look a little bit more at the image as a whole. And that's going to tell you what you need to add to make this kind of read a little bit better. So let's jump back up. In terms of the cat ear, it's got 3 dimensions. So there's going to be thickness here that we need to pay attention to. Pull this in. You'll notice that this line is going to come down and over, and that's tucking in front of this line here, showing us that there's overlap going on there. So then we've got this other side of the ear coming up. Bring this back down. Now I just want to get a basic overall shape here to his his cheeks, things like that. And then what you want to do is you want to go in and you want to kind of imply some of the shapes that you're seeing with all this hair. And so I want to do big, what we would call guide hairs if we were going to simulate this in 3D. And so these are just going to capture the direction the hair is moving. And they're not really meant to stand in for all the hair. It's really just meant to kind of show the viewer what is going on with these bigger sections of hair here. And so that's going to give the viewer the idea that, okay, well, there's a lot of hair probably, and this is kind of the direction that it's flowing. So I don't want to draw all of these. I just want to draw enough that it's like, all right, I get it. And then zooming out, you're definitely going to be able to start telling what needs to kind of be in place for this to make sense and what doesn't. And then I'll draw a few of the whiskers just to kind of indicate what's happening here, but not all of them. And then we can add in some of these darker areas here. And then we can play with his paw a little bit. So let's quickly kind of block this in. Got a little claw here. And it doesn't take much to kind of indicate what's going on. So you'll notice the outlines are kind of darker, but the interior lines are not going to be as strong. So anything that's a silhouette is going to get a heavier line. And that's, again, going to make it easier for the viewer to kind of get a visual read on what you're doing. So, and it's going to be challenging at first not to add in too much detail. It's one of those things you'll just have to play with and kind of see what happens as you go. But over time, you'll be able to get in here and do just enough to make it effective. And then we can just indicate a little bit of detail and things like that when we're finished. And so once we're done, turn off the bottom layer, and then you'll be able to see what you've got in place. Now in this case, we've got all of the lines in place, and we want to darken up the areas that are completely solid. So let's just make our brush bigger here. And let's zoom in again. And I'm going to start filling in these black areas that need to have really high contrast. A little too big with my brush there, so I'm just going to erase this out. And then I want to shade in everything except for that highlight around there. So let's turn our smoothing back down so our brush will be quick. There we go. So the eyes are going to be one of those things that's pretty important that you get in place. I might add another highlight in there just to make sure that's going to read correctly. In this case, let's add a white highlight right about here. Looking around, if there's anything else that needs to be super black, like the darks of the eyes, probably the inside of the mouth needs to be filled in a little bit here. So this will help the viewer visualize the dimension and the depth that's happening in the space here. And without using shading techniques other than just black and white, it can be really challenging to get these details into a specific place where the viewer kind of is able to look at this without the reference and tell what's going on. But even just doing what we did there, you can tell what this is. The viewer is going to be able to see, oh, okay, that's a cat. And it's not perfect, but it gives you a starting point, right? And then the next step past this would be to draw this without tracing it, right? And so what's helpful before you get to that step is let's take this cat, let's drop it over here on this side of the canvas, and then I'm going to duplicate this cat and move it over to this side. And then what I'm going to do is I've got a little action that I set up over here that converts this to kind of like a photo pencil blue that you can see here. And what I like to do is, for multiple purposes, break this down into simplified sections. And so what this does as somebody that's learning to draw on paper is it helps you see silhouette and positive and negative space a little bit more easily. But as a 3D artist, it also helps you start to figure out, if I was going to model this cat, what primitive shapes would I need to get in place so that I can create something that looks pretty close to this. So what I would start doing is, once I've got this in a place that I can kind of draw on top of it, I start breaking down simple shapes. And so we've got, start with the silhouette because that's easiest. You've got basic pyramids happening here. There's going to be a little bit of an inset going on. And so we would start to look at this and go, okay, well, I could start with a plane and then inset this and extrude into the distance on the interior part of this to create the ears. The head is going to be like a basic sphere starting off. And then the eyes are going to be spheres that go inside of that. Sphere is going to be divided down the middle, probably use symmetry on that somehow. And then all of these are going to let you start figuring out how this would be shaped. And so let's keep with just the primitive shapes for now. So we're not going to start drawing anything else on top of it, but we're just going to start defining with simple shapes what's going on here. So we've got pyramids, we've got spheres, we've got cubes or rectangles happening in here. This would all be some sort of cylinder maybe for the section here. So we've got a top and a middle, and then these would be like edge loops running down the side of the paw, and those would all connect up to create the dimensionality of our cat paw here. And so this would be what the wireframe sort of looks like. And then the whole body would be another cylinder. So we might start with the neck here, and then the middle would be there, and then down there. And so this is one exercise you can do, is again, just basic shapes. The other exercise you can do is actually drawing the wireframe. So if we were to take this again, duplicate the cat and move it out to the side. As a 3D artist, again, what's really, really helpful is helping you understand how an object is constructed in 3D space, projected back onto a two-dimensional surface with paper. So in this case, you can take any kind of photograph you want, trace the important features, and then go back and try to overlay a wireframe on top of it and ask yourself, if I was going to model this in 3D, what would the final wireframe look like with the subsurf applied and all of that stuff in Blender? What would this look like? So if we're taking a look at this and we want to draw a wireframe, we know that if we're going to start here on the nose, we're going to need to have probably this going to be symmetrical. So we're going to have these faces like this. This might come down the middle and give us something like this. There's going to be a hole in the mesh there, which is going to give us a little edge loop. And then the rest of this would be connected up on the sides. So just drawing these basic wireframes will give you an idea of what you need to do to make this happen in 3D. So this is going to be a sphere on the inside for the eye. Outside of that, you're going to need a set of edge loops to create the eyelid. So this is going to be a separate mesh, and you're going to have polygons in a circle or a ring around that. You're going to have the same thing on this side. So we're going to create a sphere. And what's really handy is learning how to model human anatomy doing the same process, because this will tell you what you need to start focusing on learning how to create when you're trying to do human meshes or creatures or whatever. So now we have to figure out how to connect this up. So we would draw a little bit of a ridge here for where the middle goes, or maybe it doesn't do a ridge like a human middle of the brow would be because the nose is down here. Maybe it actually just dips a little bit. Out here, we're going to have a sort of an upside down U shape because these are all going to be connected down to the nose. This is going to be more of a cylindrical shape here. So if these are bigger polygons, you can kind of see what that's doing there. That's going to be a pretty harsh edge defined all the way down to the outside. And then you just want to start to figure out how to connect those polygons up the way you would in 3D. So this is going to come down. Maybe that connects up there. All of these have to kind of terminate somewhere, so that won't work. So you'd have to go out to there maybe. And just by doing this, you've got a little wireframe starting to be generated. As you zoom out, you can actually see what that looks like on the cat. So this is very, very handy for helping you see in 3D on paper. And you can just keep doing this on the whole thing. And it's very, very educational. You don't have to do super small polygons. You can stick to some ones that are bigger. This is going to have an edge loop running all the way around. So let me undo that. So we've got the silhouette going out to here. This inside part is going to have polygons running on the exterior like this. And then on the inside, you're going to have this extruded into the inside like this. You're going to have another loop down here. And then you're going to have another loop. And then eventually it's going to terminate into maybe a pole or something like this, where it's all connected up. And then eventually find a way to connect all of this up here. So if you're trying to figure out how to see in 3D and draw with lines, this is what I would recommend starting off doing. Lauren's asking, in Blender, can you start with the polygons instead of the primitive shapes? Yeah, you can definitely do that. So one of the things you might want to do is take somebody's finished model and then take a wireframe view of that and then draw that. So let's take a look at, where's Blender? There it is. Let's take a look at something else we got here. I'm going to pick something that we haven't seen before because I know you guys are kind of sick of watching me draw the same or work on the same projects. So I'm gonna delve back into some of the older stuff that I used to I was working on before. I think these are on my other hard drive, so give me a second to look through here. All right, let's pick my last big 3D illustration and we can work on this. Okay, so I'm just gonna use the sword as an example. This is the last 3D illustration that I did right around this time last year, actually. So if we open this up, you can see kind of what we got here. And this was kind of midway through the project. So we've got a little sword. So what I'm gonna do is move this to a new layer. And so we've got a finished model here. Everything's already modeled with polygons, and it's been grouped and stuff like that. So if we switch into wireframe, you're gonna see kind of how this looks. It is currently, I think, linked to the scene. So if we right click and make this a local group, see if we can get this into the actual scene. Okay, don't want to do that. Let's go to the objects. I'm gonna get rid of some of these windows. Okay. Control L. Okay, not sure what we need to do to get that local, but I'm gonna go back a little further and pick something else from another file. Okay, this should be actually in Yeah, this file. Okay, so this one's live. If we go into the sword here, you can see all the polygons. So if we want to work on something specific, we can grab one of these and then jump into here and kind of see what this looks like. Now you're not going to have a wireframe overlay in 2.79. 2.8, this would be super easy. You would just turn on the wireframe thing here. There is a wireframe modifier. So if you select an object that you want to add this to, you can take this and add a wireframe modifier. It's going to go a little crazy here because of the scale. But if I scale this down, you can see what it's doing. It's adding wireframe meshes to every single edge in the scene. So I just need to make this really, really small, and that will show up there. It's going to ask you if you want to replace the original, so you can turn that off and it will actually keep that underneath it. And then you can use a material offset here that correlates to a material that you have here on the mesh for how to show your wireframe in the viewport. So if I add another material, I can create a new one that is just going to be called wireframe. And this is 0, 1, 2, second slot here, third in the list, but it starts at counting at 0, so 0, 1, 2. And then I just want to turn this all the way down to black. And I'll even do that in the viewport, so it will show up over here. Let's go back to our modifiers, 0, 1, 2. Here. And that's all you gotta do to kind of get that in place. Might even try to make this a little smaller. It's a little too small. Split the difference, there we go. Okay, so now that we have this in place, we can pick an angle that we want to draw from that has an interesting knot or something fun here. And then once again, we would save out our image here. So let's talk about doing something that's a little bit more from a distorted angle. So let's do something like 20mm lens. And this would be somebody taking a super close-up picture of this with a 20mm lens. Grab one of those. Image, save as. Let's jump back into our streaming section here. And let's load this up. Okay, so all we need to do is copy this. And we'll throw this into a new layer here. And let's draw on top. And there we go. So yeah, this is a good way to set this up. And from here, it's good practice to kind of figure out how this is shaped and why it's shaped. So this won't help you if all you're doing is tracing and you're not thinking as you go. The idea here is to kind of learn more about the underlying structure of the material or the mesh so that when you were sketching on your own, you can repeat the process for the way this looks. And so we know that over here, we have an outside shape. And what you can also do is sketch the stuff that's not showing. So sometimes that can help if you're trying to use your imagination to dial this in a little bit, figure out what this looks like. I'm going to turn up my smoothing. And sometimes it all depends on your goals here. But I mean, even if you're just trying to work on your sketching in terms of the technique so you can get good line quality, then this will still be helpful. So again, yeah, you could trace all of the polygons, and again, that might be useful. What I would recommend doing if you're going to do this is start looking at the structure as you go, and maybe instead of doing every every line that you see, start taking lines out and determine what lines actually have to be there for it to maintain the structural integrity of the shape. And again, this is without shading. So without the ability to have shadowing and even a little bit of lighting like Blender has here, how are you going to still maintain the illusion for the viewer that this is sort of a chord that's wrapping around a cylindrical surface? And so if we look at the entire length of this handle for the sword here, it is basically a oblong cylinder that is wrapped with a very complex inner working of these chords. And because of the object that it's wrapped around, as well as the objects inserted next to the body of the cylinder, it's distorting the way these are wrapped. And so as a result, not only of that, but of the way they're twisted as they're wrapped around the handle, you're getting quite a bit of distortion and bumpiness happening with the material here. Now, if you rendered this and you actually wanted to practice sketching for texture, then you'd have a whole other dimension to consider, because the actual render here of this model, if we take a look at it, has quite a bit of detail on the actual model itself. So if I jump back into these settings here for this project, and we take a look at some of the renders, I can kind of show you what this looks like. Let's see. Yeah, so these are some earlier renders that I did of the sword texture. So you can kind of see what this sort of texture is on the wrap here. And as we get further and further into this, you can see it gets more and more detailed. And so at this point, trying to sketch this as a full render would give you a lot of education in terms of how to consistently get this look going across a surface. And as it wraps around and under with this chord twisting, how do you maintain the look without necessarily having to draw every single little stitch here? And so all of that can help. But yeah, so that's what I would recommend doing. So if you're interested in more about this project, you can see it on my website at brandonhicks.com, which is actually my ArtStation profile. So I've got some more of my portfolio stuff there if you want to check that out. But yeah. So this is a good way to kind of get in here and sketch as we go. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is sketching from reference in terms of freehand sketching. So what I would recommend doing if you're going to do this is try to stay quick and loose. When you're studying, you can take your time and go real slow. But if you're actually trying to work on your penmanship, don't sit in here and do this. You want to get to a point where you can pretty quickly move the pen around so that your sketch maintains sort of energy. And if you slow down, it can kind of feel a little like it loses all of its integrity in terms of the line quality. Most people that sketch do it quickly. And that's kind of the whole idea of a sketch, is that you're doing a really, really quick representation of something so that you can nail down an idea and record that, but it's not for rendering something up. So turn this off. Now you can kind of see from this, I can go, okay, well, without everything turned on and kind of confusing me here, what do I need to do to recreate this? And so if this was a photo, it would be like, all right, well, what's this pattern look like from the side for the sword? If we're sketching the sword here and I'm trying to recreate what this looks like, we know that we're going to have a section here where the cord is wrapped under and gets tucked into this cap on the end of the sword. Then it looks like we're going to have a piece coming down here that's over this piece. So that piece is going to come out this side somewhere. And then we've got another piece wrapping over here. So we would need to erase out this section here. And this is a good exercise for you to try to translate to another point of view what you're seeing here. And so once this goes over the front, looks like we've got a section coming down from this side here. And you want to say, all right, from a side angle, what would this look like? How is it spaced out? What am I seeing? You know, all of that sort of stuff. And eventually you'll get to where you can look at any angle of an object, and because you understand how the structure is made up, you can translate it into an object that is straight on. And this is really useful because as a 3D artist, typically what you're going to be dealing with in terms of final concept art are going to be something that are called model sheets. And model sheets are pretty specific to our workflow as 3D artists, because they give you one step further than the concept art. They give you a breakdown of proportions and everything, the way that you would need to see them to accurately reproduce them in 3D. And so a model sheet for this type of object is going to give you a front section, a side view, a top view, and sometimes a perspective rendering. That will give you an idea, if these aren't doing it for you, what it's going to take to get this looking correct from like a 45-degree angle. And so from the front, you're going to see just the really straight on view of the silhouette here. From the side, you're going to see the entire sword, and it's going to have the guard at the front, and then it's going to have the handle with all of the sections here and all the pieces, and the top is going to be the same as the side. And what's great about the model sheet, the way that it's created, is that everything lines up. So from the side to the top, because it's really the same thing, just rotated, you're going to have the exact same dimensions lined up for you from the top to the side. And so everything will be perfectly to scale. At least that's the idea. And when it's done that way, you're going to be able to line this up in Blender and then use this as a guide to create more complex objects. And so if you're familiar with the car course that I have on theorangeguild.com, you'll know that I created a model sheet for the concept car that we worked on because it was a lot more complicated than a regular object that you would model. And so because it has a lot of curves and intricate connections, we needed a way to accurately get that blocked in there. And then the perspective angle would have what we have here, just kind of shrunk it down. So might take this whole thing here, just so I don't have to draw this in perspective right now. Might shrink that down and put that down there, and that would kind of show us what we need to see for the model sheet. But yeah. So the next part will be to actually draw from reference. And reference is going to be key to making sure that you round yourself out as an artist, and as something that in the past I haven't used a lot of, and I've struggled because of it. And so as you're getting in here and you're working on your own stuff, make sure that whatever you're doing, you're pulling reference. And this isn't just for drawing, this is especially for 3D. So you'll see for all of my projects that I have that I'm trying to do something, this is the sword project that I just showed you. I have a reference section here, and I have hundreds of pins that I grabbed for all parts of the project. So down at the very, very beginning, you're going to see a lot of the influence of the final scene came from seeing illustrations and trying to study what the armor looks like for these people, and what sort of setting I could put this into. And then you get into fight scenes and how people would be swinging around these swords. And then you've got a lot more study in terms of, well, am I going to do infantry, horses, doing that sort of thing with the cavalry, or what are we going to do here? At some point, I decided I wanted to put some boats on the water. And so there's just tons of stuff that you get in here and you start figuring out you need to do. All of this stuff up here is for material reference because I wanted to do sand on the beach. And so, yeah, tons of stuff here. to pick from, and Pinterest is a great place to do it because there's an infinite amount of images to pick from here. So let's pick something that we want to kind of work with as far as drawing. And in this case, I might pick something like, let's pick a person. And let's try to draw that. You'll also realize, like, as you get further and further into this, that what might seem a little difficult because of subject matter, as you start seeing things as shapes, won't really matter quite as much. And so people may seem like a really, really hard thing to do right now compared to other objects. But from a reference standpoint, from a sketching standpoint, they're really not that complicated if you're drawing from a photo. Now, when you get into doing things from memory or trying to do things design-wise, where you're creating things on the fly, it can get kind of difficult because you have to pull from your visual library to help you get things kind of put into place, and that takes a lot of experience. But what I want to do now is I don't want to trace this. I want to try to block in my own version of this off to the side. And so what I'm going to do is switch to, let's just go full screen, and I'm going to draw kind of what I see. And so it can be intimidating to start if you've never kind of drawn from a photo to try to replicate it over to the side. But there's some techniques you can use to make this a little easier for yourself. So what I like to do first is start by creating myself a little bit of a guide to go off of by replicating just the big parts of the image. And so there's a couple of ways you can do this. One is to use like the box method, and that will allow you to say, okay, well, I know I want to draw something that's pretty much the same as this over here. So the first thing I want to do is at least get this box put into place, right? And then I know, okay, we can measure this a little bit. So like about a quarter of the way down, the eye is right here. So this is going to be where the eye goes. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time making this look pretty. I'm just trying to get the basic shapes in here, and we're going to match up where these are touching the edges and where they're located approximately in the frame to kind of gauge where this needs to be. So before you start working up one section of the image with a lot of detail, what I would do is I would do a first pass that is really, really loose and doesn't have a lot of detail, just to block in where all the features are. And that way you're not gonna have to erase a bunch of stuff or, you know, fix things. And so we know the nose is gonna be somewhere around here. The other eye needs to be right about there somewhere. And I know I need to stay away from the frame about that much. So I'm gonna block in what I'm seeing there. Want to detail out the eye, but I'm not going to. I need to move on. So we're going to start with the eyebrow. It starts here, ends probably about there. I'm just going to draw a line right now for where that needs to go. Start here with this eyebrow. This is going to go off the page. Hook around. She's got some hair that's coming in over there. So that's going to duck in. The nose needs to come down to about the middle of the canvas. We've got nostril here, nostril here. And then when I look at other features in the image to scale how big the nose needs to be. So the nose is kind of the same width as one of her eyes, maybe a little smaller. So if the eye here is about this wide, then the nose at its biggest point doesn't need to get any wider than this eye from front to back. So if I notice that the nostrils are getting a little too big, I can kind of correct right now before I've done a lot of work. And then let's just take the left side of her nose and let's draw a straight line. So from here down to here, I know if I drop that down, that's going to be kind of the side of her nose there. So if we drop that straight down, it's going to be over there. Same thing for this corner of her eye. We drop this straight down. We know that that's going to be kind of over here. So now we can move in from these corners to gauge where the center of these would be for her nostrils. This is going to need to be sort of here, and then this one's going to need to be around here. And if you're running out of room again, you can always adjust. That's the beauty of using Photoshop. But if you're going to do it on paper, these days I sketch with pen. But if I was going to do this as somebody who's starting off, I would probably sketch with pencil and just kind of gauge what I need to make this all work. So again, we're going for big shapes here. Just want to get the silhouette kind of blocked in, and then don't worry about anything else. Mouth, top of the mouth needs to start somewhere about here. Then we've got the width from the top of the lip to the bottom of the lip there. You'll notice it's also kind of on an axis. It's on a tilt. So if this was a box, it's going to be tilted off to the side that lines up with the rest of her face. So make sure you don't untilt everything. And if you do, you can grab your lasso tool and then just kind of rotate that into place there. And again, that's why it's great to have digital tools at your disposal, because you can always correct things like that. And then what we might do is, again, we just want to draw the big box first. So let's say that if we know the big box starts there and ends somewhere down there, then we're basically going to need to have the mouth kind of in here. You know, the corners are going to be sort of halfway down, it looks like, maybe a little lower than half. And then you just fill in where things start so you can connect the dots. So if the gap for her mouth needs to be somewhere like that, then that means the bottom lip is going to be shaped sort of like this. Top lips are going to come down and connect to the outside. Got a little bit of thickness here for the inside of the lip. It's going to come kind of in a wobbly line towards the middle. And this is also where you start to do something that is kind of referred to me in art school as drawing with your eyes. And you're starting to trace these lines with your eyes and gauging the distance as you go. And so as you're following that along with your eye, you're starting to go, okay, well, I need to put every little curve in and match it to the curves that I see over here. And the more you can start to match the curves accurately to the ones you see in the reference without having to trace, the better you're going to be at gauging scale and all of that. And the more you can get down how proportional things need to be and gauging distance, the better you'll get at sketching, because learning how to translate what you're seeing in one place to another is what sketching is all about. And so eventually you'll be sketching from what you see in your head and being able to translate that onto paper. And that's the goal that you want to start reaching, is getting to the point where instead of looking at a photo, you're seeing a monster in your head, and then you're saying, okay, what angle is the monster standing in? How do I see that? You can clearly see that in your mind, and then you can say, all right, now I need to take the things that I know about art and I need to apply those and put that down on paper. And sounds hard at first, but after you practice a little bit, just like with Blender, you'll be able to start doing it. So common mistake a lot of people make is they want to draw all the lines of the teeth. You don't want to do that, especially if they're connected in the middle. You can see there's really no contrast there. So a little illustration tip, if you're going to draw teeth on people, is don't draw the vertical lines if there's not any gaps. So get a little highlight on the tongue there, but I'm going to leave that. And then again, we're just going for big shapes here. So I'm going to go for outlines of the form. Get a little bit of area where the chin would be down here. And then if we drop this line from the center of the mouth down to the bottom of where the chin is, you're going to see where her fingers kind of intersect here. So this finger is going to go off the page. We're going to try to nail that angle in terms of this angle here to this angle here. I'm going to pull this over, and I'm going to look at the distance from the edge of her finger here to the lip. And I'm going to block this in terms of the height of the fingertip. And then eventually we're going to connect that down. It would be tempting to just draw a straight line without really paying attention, but there is a little bit of a bulge here for the knuckle or the underside of the finger, so you want to pay attention to that. And then you've got a little bit of a gap. There's a lot of curvature happening here. So you've got the top of the knuckle, then a big curve, and then a straight line, and then another curve, and then a straight line there. So you want to draw up to about here, come in, curve and up. And before you start drawing, one section at a time all the way up, start from the end where the middle finger needs to go off the page, figure out this angle from the tip of this finger down to this finger, and then match it here. And that gives you a start and a finish. So that way you can go back and forth between whatever angles you need to kind of make this connect up, just like this. So it's not going to be perfect because our frame wasn't perfect, but that is pretty close. You see the pinky goes off there. Fingertip is going to be up here. Pay attention to the lines and everything that's overlapping. Just block it in. If you want to, you can kind of block in where the knuckles would be. Not super important for this sort of sketch, but got that in. And now that we have the finger and we know where the knuckle is on this finger, we can gauge where the bottom of that chin needs to be, which is right about here. So I'm gonna imagine this continues all the way through and up, just like that. And if you need to actually connect them, then go ahead and do it. And then you can always go back and erase what doesn't need to be in the middle there. And then again, to gauge, it's a little hard to tell where this is all going. So use the landmarks in the image to help you out here. So let's start with the edge of the cheek over here. We know that if we go up from the center of the nose, up a little bit and over, we're gonna have on this same axis where the edge of that cheek hits. So we need to go up to about here and then angle over using that same tilt as this mouth and the rest of the facial features. That's kind of where the cheek is going to be. That's going to drop down. It's going to curve in a little bit, back down lower. Again, we can take the center of the mouth out to the side. That's where the curvature of the jawline is. So out to about here. And what I would probably do in this case, instead of doing all these little sketchy lines like you're seeing, is I'm going to use the smoothing to help me out here. So let's turn the smoothing up to 50 again. And then when I start up here, I did that on the eraser instead of the brush. So when I start up here, I'm going to come down. I want this to curve in a little bit. It's going to curve back down. And then we're going to curve around. And that's going to come down and meet up with the chin, just like that. Okay. So if we're not happy with the lines, again, we want to gauge how much this needs to be curved, pick when we need to curve this up, and then kind of do what we need to do there. And we just kind of correct as we go. So you're going to notice too, as you go, you need to start gauging overall scale. And so if things aren't looking right when you zoom out and you step back, it's time to make adjustments at this level of the sketch. And so let's look at the distance here. We can see that maybe the nose is a little too small. So let's scale this up a little bit. You can see that maybe the mouth is, I don't know, maybe the mouth is, I think the mouth is okay. I'm not liking the distance here for the face. That's feeling a little weird. The eyes are also feeling a little off. So let's grab that. Let's bring that over and scale that up a bit. I'm going to tilt this over. Just like that. Maybe a little too big. Something like that. And then let's rethink this line. Because I'm noticing there's a lot more distance here from this side of the mouth to this side of the mouth. So I want to make sure that I'm copying that same amount of distance and coming down where it needs to match up here. So here down to here. Okay, so we need to start right about here, come up on the side. Yeah, and then these actually connect all the way over to there. So this is where you're going to start training your eye to see what you're actually needing to draw instead of what's there. So let's start here, and then we're going to come down and connect right about there. So to me, that feels a lot wider than it should be, but it's accurate according to the scale that we have here for the distance. And then what you need to do is readjust your expectations of where things are and kind of draw the rest of the stuff in. So we can just kind of block in those eyelashes there. Get the main sections of her eyes kind of in place. Things will start to feel a whole lot better once you get the eyes in the right place. Okay, so need to draw the outside of her eyes here. Make sure that you follow that actual outline, so it needs to not touch the bottom, but get close. Something like that. And then let's block in the eyebrows a little more. So we'll start here. And I'm just going to draw the big sweeping shapes that I'm seeing. There we go. Okay, we also need to darken in this section here. Turn off the smoothing at this point. I'm not going to darken the whole thing in. I'm just going to go about halfway down, and that's going to indicate that it kind of tapers off that edge right there. So you're not actually going to see a lot of contrast happening on the bottom edge of that inset for the nose, for the nostril, even though it's there. And so you don't want to put that in there if it doesn't need to be in there. And then we need to go ahead and get rid of all of these little lines that are not necessary. Because with a woman's face, you're going to want to draw less lines than you typically would on a man's face because it's not as flattering. So anyways, It's the basic idea. Outline the inside of the mouth here. And this is where you want to start figuring out where to add contrast to make things pop. So outline the big important details down here. I'm not going to fill in the whole mouth. I'm just going to fill in where the top of the shadow is for the tongue. So let's start sort of about here, go over to there. That's all you need to kind of indicate what's going on there. You've got the lip. And you can see just by adding in a few key details in the right places, we're able to start kind of getting this in the proper place here. So let's erase out all of our guidelines. And then it's just about going through and darkening up those areas that have what you need to be put into place. So we'll start here. Something like that. There we go. Let's darken up these eyes. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in some of those white highlights. And you can see just from that, we've kind of got a good layout for the face. It's going to take more shading to get this looking good in terms of the final block in here. But from a rough sketch to something that kind of gives us an idea of what's going on, it's not bad. And with practice, you'll obviously get better. So this is something that no matter how much you do, you're going to get better as you kind of get in here and do more and more of it. So it's tempting, again, as a 3D artist, you want to go in and model all of this and stuff like that. But the more lines you put in on a face like this, the more it looks. She'll start to look like an old woman, so you don't want to do that. But anyways, so this finger is sort of in the foreground, so we need to outline that a little more. The same thing for the thumb here. There we go. Let's add a little bit more of an outline on the lips here, just to kind of get those standing out. This is going to be better with smoothing turned on, so if you need that, definitely use it. But there you go. So not bad. It's not the most successful study I've ever done, but it's a start, and that's the point. You wanna practice more and more and more. So let's see what we got here time-wise. 20 minutes. All right, I'm going to open this up now for discussion. If you guys want to talk about anything related to the topic tonight that you have questions on, something you want me to show you how to do as far as sketching goes, And if nothing comes out of it, then we can move on and talk a little bit about perspective possibly, because that's a bit more related to something we're going to want to get into in the future. So let me know if you have any questions. I can also show you some examples of some other just freehand sketching that I did. So I'm to the point now where I'm trying to sketch more and more every day, and blocking in, little things in my sketchbook. And so I'm starting to add more and more stuff, and getting to the point where I can kind of start to detail stuff out in a pleasing way. But yeah, so that's the goal. Also don't mind just kind of sketching the last 20 minutes if you guys would rather see that. So just, again, let me know in the chat what you would like me to do, whether it just be sketch or also talk about perspective, if that would help, and we can get into that. So perspective as a 3D artist is one of those things that is very, you take for granted a lot as a 3D guy, because, or gal, because the camera and the render engine and everything in Blender is done for you. And so you don't end up spending a lot of time thinking about how to get things to look properly on a two-dimensional surface. And we forget a lot of times, I think, because we work in 3D, that we're rendering all this stuff on a monitor. So this is a two-dimensional viewing experience. And as a result of that, when we need to touch things up, we get into Photoshop or we get into After Effects or whatever we're doing, it helps to understand how to render things out, and also for design purposes, like what we're talking about tonight. So if you don't really understand perspective or how to render form or lighting and any of that sort of stuff on paper, then get into a point where you kind of understand a little bit more about that can really improve your skills as a 3D artist. So basic perspective is handled in 1-point, 2-point, or 3-point perspective. There's more versions of perspective that are more complicated than that, but this is pretty much all you need to know as somebody who wants to design something on paper to get a versatile range of angles to render something out with. So let's take a look at some of this stuff. So Lauren's asking, what is MakeHuman? MakeHuman is a program that is open source, just like Blender, and it allows you to create realistic human models by dragging around sliders with preset models, so that you don't have to model them from scratch. So you can swap in and out all sorts of different kinds of characters, different kinds of muscles and body types, and also clothing, so that you can really quickly get models created for a human instead of having to model them from scratch. And so I use that for my Katana 3D illustration, because I wanted to be able to focus on the entire scene instead of having to spend a month on a character, because I knew they were going to be in the foreground. So MakeHuman is a really, really cool program that I'll probably cover at some point in a tutorial. So let's talk about perspective. Perspective on paper is not something that's super easy. In 3D, if we're looking at a project, it is super easy to jump into 3D and move things around, pick a camera angle, a focal length for the lens that you would have, just like in photography. You've got camera at your disposal that allows you to kind of frame things from a point of view, and then just rotate it into place. And again, we don't think about this. We just do it. It's one of those things that we've done so often that we don't even have to bother with how it works. Well, it doesn't work that way on paper. On paper, you have to understand how perspective works so that you can render an object from a certain point of view and a certain angle. And so There is perspective as it relates to objects as you're rotating them and how to put them into a certain angle and position. But then there's also perspective from the viewer's point of view. And so if we're talking about us drawing on a piece of paper, we're basically the camera. We're looking at whatever we're creating on the page as our point of view and our angle. So that's where we're drawing from. So in Blender, if we're jumping to the camera settings and we look at this, we've got a typical 1920 by 1080 full HD sort of aspect ratio here. And then you've got focal length, which will let you change the basically the type of lens that you have on the front of your camera. Higher focal lengths will give you a longer look for your objects, which means that you're going to have more flattened perspective. So people that are shooting sporting events are typically shooting from very, very far away distances. And so the longer focal lengths allow you to zoom in on action, but it also flattens the scene. And so you're going to get a lot less distortion there. On the other side of this, if you're going to go super wide with a wide angle lens, which is typically what people use for architecture or taking photos of things that are outside, outdoors, landscapes, things like that, for big wide vistas, you can see the sword looks completely different from a focal length perspective by just changing this one setting. And so this sword looks huge now because of how close we have to get to it to get the same sort of framing. And all of that's due to the type of lens that we're using. You've also got a lot of other settings, such as the focus, which is controlled by the depth of field, and the aperture on your actual camera, which you can set here. This will control what is in focus and whether or not the background is blurred. And then, that also correlates to a lot of other settings that we don't have access to in Blender, but would be things that we would have to think about from an actual photographer's perspective, such as exposure and whether you're actually going to, try to recreate something on film, whether it's digital. You got different considerations for what kind of noise is added to the image and all that sort of stuff. So, but the big important thing here to remember is that perspective changes with focal length. And the reason for that is, again, related to whether we are looking at an object in perspective, like this, where we get closer to an object and it gets distorted and we have things falling in front of each other and all of that, or if we are in orthographic mode, as you can see right here, things are very flat. So this is everything's in a straight line, there's no distortion, no problems, no matter how close we get, everything's very evenly spaced. The second you switch into perspective mode, you've got things in front are really big, things far away are really small. And that's just the way of the world. So let's talk about how this works on paper. Perspective. So tonight, I'm just going to talk about one type of perspective because we don't have a lot of time. But let's talk about 1-point perspective. And then if you guys are interested, I can do another video at some point in the future on more things. I'm going to rewrite that because that looks terrible. Okay, so 1-point perspective basically means that we are only using one point of view to kind of render the scene, the object, whatever we're rendering. And when I say rendering, I mean drawing on paper, right? And so there's a couple of elements you have to be aware of when we're talking about perspective. And one of those, the first thing you learn about is a thing called the horizon line. So the horizon line is literally what it sounds like. It is the line that is where the sky meets the land. And so no matter where you're at, whether you're outside or inside, there is a horizon line and it's basically going to be at your eye level. And so outside, it's pretty simple. If you're drawing a landscape, this is where the sun would set. If you're going to do that, it's a terrible sun, but there you go. And then inside, again, just think of it like if you're a person, it's going to be your eyesight, your eye level is the horizon here. So let's talk about what all of this stuff is here in 1-point perspective and how this works. So first thing we need to do is we need to draw a horizon line. Okay. And the other thing you need to learn about is something called vanishing points. So in 1 point perspective, we have one vanishing point. And it's really simple to figure out whether you're in 1 point perspective, 2 point perspective, or 3 point perspective, because each perspective has multiple vanishing points. So 1 point perspective only has one vanishing point. You can put it anywhere you want on the horizon line. And as soon as you put that somewhere, that is the perspective, right? That is the vanishing point where all of the lines go back to in the horizon. 2 point perspective, there would be 2 of these on the horizon. And so this would be another vanishing point. 3 point perspective, you're going to have another one, and it's going to be somewhere way above the horizon or way below the horizon. And this is where this is going to converge. All your vertical axis stuff is going to converge. And so we know from 3D, with 3D, we have an x-axis. We have, in our case, it's not a y-axis on the up and down, it's a z-axis. And then in the distance, we have, let's say, a y-axis, right? Sometimes these are flipped, but you get the point. X, Y, and Z, we have 3 coordinates. And so this correlates here with perspective. 1 point perspective, we're only looking at perspective from one of these axes. From 2 point perspective, we're taking the X and the Y into account with these 2 points. And then with 3 point perspective, we're dealing with all 3 axes at the same time. And so to give you a better idea of how this works, if we are drawing in 1 point perspective and we have a vanishing point in the distance here, let's turn off all of our brush settings here. Basically, any lines that are straight lines in our 3D scene are going to converge back towards this vanishing point in the distance. So if we have a cube that we're trying to draw, all the horizontal lines are going to stay horizontal. All the vertical lines are going to stay vertical, but anything that goes back into distance in terms of, let's call this the y-axis because we're Blender users, anything that goes back into the distance has to go towards this point in space. So that means when we are drawing depth for this cube, eventually it's going to go all the way back to this point on the horizon. And so now, if we were to draw this cube from this point of view, you would have the cube front side here. The top side would go back to about this point in space. And then if we were going to draw the wireframe going all the way through, the vertical lines would stay vertical. The horizontal lines are going to stay horizontal, but the lines that are at the bottom are going to go back to this point in space, which is how it connects down here, as you can see. And so to clear this up in terms of how it looks on the screen, what we see are these lines, the ones in red. And this continues to work for anything that you draw in 1 point perspective. So that's the whole box right there. Now, if we wanted to draw a row of boxes, all we would have to do is, again, extend the row out to the side. And what's going to happen now is that wherever we choose to start drawing this box, let's say it's right here for the left side, the right side's going to end right here. Then we just connect the lines that are going back into the distance to the vanishing point. So we start at the vanishing point, we go all the way to the front corner, start at the vanishing point, we go all the way to the other side of the box. That automatically draws the other corners for us. So now we just drop in the vertical lines. Same thing for the sides. We start at the corner here, go back to the vanishing point, start at the corner here, go back to the vanishing point, and now this tells us how far down we have to go to connect to the bottom here. So that will connect over to there, and that will connect up there. So now we've got our second box. There we go. And we can just keep doing this into space. And so at any point in time, if we want to draw another box that's further into the distance, all we have to do is stay on these vanishing point lines and make sure that we're paying attention to where those connect to the front and back. So if we want to draw this behind the corner of this box, just make sure we don't go all the way down to the bottom like that. And that's our box right there. So this is how you can really quickly start to block in like entire cities, is by drawing huge grids of these cubes side by side. But this works for anything. It doesn't have to be boxes. So if we're dealing with, let's say a cylinder, we would start with a cylinder maybe here. Let's draw sort of a circular object in the front. Center of this is going to go back to the vanishing point over here, which means that at some point, all of the lines are going to converge to the vanishing points on the edges. And at any point in time where we pick the end of the silhouette, we say we want the silhouette to be about ending right about here, then we would just continue to draw the circle, match the back end of it over there, and then we can just cut it off right here. So this is how you can really quickly begin to block in those three-dimensional primitive shapes into 3D space on paper, is by learning perspective. And what I would do is spend some time drawing all of the lines that go all the way through the object, and then start just to erase the lines that are not supposed to be there, so that it looks a little bit more cleaned up and you're able to kind of present the shape in a better way. So by the end of it, you should have an object that is completely accurate in three-dimensional space. And you can test this by actually trying to recreate this sort of look in Blender with the way that you have your camera set up. So just real quickly, I know we're pretty much done at this point, but I'll show you a couple of the other perspectives so you can get an idea of how they work. So let me go ahead and get rid of everything here. And let's talk about two-point perspective. So two-point perspective has 2 points on the horizon, and these make a grid. So if we're drawing straight lines out from all of these points in space, you can see what it does here. And then draw from this vanishing point. Let's pick another color. And we'll draw across this way. And where these points converge, where they create this grid, you can see this as sort of X and Y coordinates making the 3D grid that we have in Blender. And this is how you can create an accurate 3D grid on paper in Photoshop or in your notebook. And so now by using just these two vanishing points, you can create three-dimensional objects. So let me lower the opacity here for this layer so we can draw on top and not get in the way. And now what we can do is we can start drawing cubes in perspective. So again, the only thing that is going to stay consistent throughout the way we sketch now is going to be the verticals. So the X coordinate, let's say this is the X coordinate, and this is going to be the Y coordinate over here. Z coordinate is still up and down. So all of the Z coordinate stuff is still going to be straight. So all of our vertical lines on our cube are still going to go straight up out of the ground, just like this. And then we go from the vanishing point straight to the corners from both vanishing points. So one starts on one side and the other starts on the other side. And that's how you get a complete cube. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that these verticals are matching in height. And so what I would do is I would start with one side first, get the verticals in place where they connect to the top and the bottom, and then draw from the other vanishing point. So I'm going to undo these lines. Because the heights were not correct. Okay, so let's just start with the Y over here to this side. And now we can go from this corner back to this point and this corner back to this point. And you can see how it automatically lines up and connects for you. So draw the box here, and then you would drop another vertical and you can see how it lands exactly on the intersection point on the grid back there. And so if you have an accurate grid and you have accurate line work, everything should line up no problem. So now we can get rid of all the extra stuff over here. And now we've got our box. And so again, if you want to get in here, you can delete the stuff that's not necessary on the inside. So we're just looking at the front side of the box here. And then we have the same thing happening over here. So if we want to extend this into the distance, we can just follow this line all the way up to here. Say we want another box there. We're going to need to go back to the vanishing point over there. Pick how wide it's going to be. And then you can actually just, let's say we extrude it up from the ground, but we're going to do it on paper. Okay, so let's grab all the corners of the box and we're going to bring this straight up just like this. Now I don't know how tall it needs to be yet, so I'm not gonna go too high. But what we need to do is decide how tall it needs to be. And if we want to match the height of this first cube, we just take this wall, the top part of this line, go back to the vanishing point, and wherever this vertical line meets, that'll make it the same height and perspective. Okay, so now we can erase this line because we don't need it. We have our vertical that is going to tell us what distance and height the rest of these need to be. So this is already the right height. This means this needs to be that height. And then we need to draw all the way back to the vanishing point here, all the way back to the vanishing point here to get that intersection. Okay. And then once you got that done, you've got your box. And that's all you got to do to create objects in perspective. Now, obviously, it gets a lot more complicated when you're dealing with more complicated objects, but the basic principle is the same, whether you're dealing with buildings, cars, vehicles, humans, creatures, whatever you're trying to draw. All of the basic primitives can be drawn using these techniques in perspective, okay? So now let's talk about 3-point perspective. And I'm going to just go ahead and reuse this section that we have here. So a 2-point perspective, we've got the grid for the X and Y coordinates that you see here, right? So let's go ahead and get rid of the vanishing point terminology. And let's say this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. The z-axis is obviously going to be up and down. So the vanishing point needs to be way down, sort of at the bottom somewhere. So let's say the z-axis is way down here. So now what you do is you have another vanishing point that allows you to draw perspective lines out from there. So if we pick another color, then whenever we draw in a spiral straight out from this vanishing point, it's going to tell us what our verticals are going to do as we're drawing in space. Okay, and so now if we were to scale this whole thing back up, because typically the Z vanishing point is going to go off the page down at the bottom, now we can draw buildings that are in 3-point perspective. So let's take this back down again. And then up here, let's draw here. So what we would do in this case is we would pick a corner for a building. Let's say it's right about here. Let's say we want the other side of the building to go out to there. It's the same rules as the 2-point perspective, and the only thing that changes is when you get to the verticals. So now what we want to do is we want to follow the guidelines back to the vanishing point that's off the page now. And we're going to draw this vertical line going down here. We're going to draw this vertical line going down here. and we're going to draw this vertical line going down here. So you can probably tell from maybe some cartoons that you've seen in the past that this is how they would draw really, really wide angle, matte paintings or whatever from that perspective, because this is all they would need to do to kind of give you an hint of an indication that the perspective is really, really extreme. And so you'll be able to tell when things are not working because they won't follow these guidelines. But all of this perspective matches up with the same sort of things that you would see in 3D. So I could take a cube, make it a really elongated cube and extrude it out like this. And then in Blender, we can make the exact same thing happen if we could figure out exactly what camera angle and exactly what lens focal length to put the camera at. We can recreate this exact same shape using that same idea. So now if we want to cut this off at some point so it's not going off the page, start from one of the vanishing points over there, connect it to the other vanishing point over there, and then all we have to do is erase where the bottom of this would disappear. And so now we have a little building sitting on the ground, just like this. And the street could continue up from this side over to there, and this could be the other side of the block over to there. So that means the sidewalk would come down to maybe here, and then go back up to over here. And now we've got our little sidewalk. Maybe we have a stop sign. Another sign over here, or maybe a mailbox or something. You're gonna have entrance and a doorway and maybe signs and stuff like that. Off the side of this, maybe we have a flagpole where a flag is hanging. All of that can be done in perspective the same way. And so this is, again, once you figure out how the perspective works, it's pretty simple. You just decide from the beginning what perspective points you want to have on the page. And then from then on, all of the stuff that you draw has to match that same perspective or it's not going to work. But as long as you kind of know those rules, it's pretty easy to know when you need to line things up a certain way. When it's not working, it will be pretty obvious. And yeah, we got little seams in the sidewalk here. And there we go. Now we got a little beginning of a little city here. And of course, these seams are not going to be the same angle all the way down. They're going to slowly start to even out and be level with the horizon line as we get further up here. So you need to follow the little blue guidelines as you're getting further and further into the distance over here. But yeah, that's what you would need to do. So guys, I hope you enjoyed tonight. It was a little bit of a deviation from what we normally do, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I can do a whole lot more stuff on sketching and illustration if it's helpful for you guys in the future. I love talking about this kind of stuff, and it's sort of a second passion apart from 3D for me. So if you guys would like to get into more concept art stuff, more painting, drawing in general, let me know. And I would love to kind of be your guide and take you through how all that works and answer your questions for that stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed this week's live stream. I will be back Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central Time. So Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays every week I'm back doing Blender live streams for a couple of hours each night. And if you'd like to see more, head on over to the link at the bottom in the description where you can get a free month of tutorials and courses at theorangeguild.com. And until I see you guys next week, hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will catch you guys later. See ya.